So period 4 is looking at the period from 1800 to 1848, really the first half of the 1800s or the first half of the 19th century. So by 1800 the country had been firmly established, as we've already seen, and taking us all the way through 1848 really gets us up to the 1850s, which is a decade of crisis that leads up to the American Civil War. So as the first part of period 4, we're going to look at the market revolution. And the market revolution are some dramatic changes in the economy and in technology and in transportation and industrialization that changes American society pretty profoundly. And keep in mind that all the things that we're really going to talk about here, especially those economic and societal changes, have been taking place in the background of other things that we've been talking about, like the Revolution of 1800, the election of Jefferson, and the War of 1812, and those types of things. So essential question 1 is, what were the main elements of the market revolution? The first main element of the market revolution are changes in transportation and communication. And in fact, the changes in transportation are usually referred to as the transportation revolution, but this is really sort of a smaller subcategory or smaller part of the larger overall market revolution. And part of that transportation revolution was roads. Not that roads were a new thing, but that the country was really investing in building roads as states and local governments and private companies built toll roads called turnpikes, where you would pay a toll to use that road and transport your goods that way. And Congress even got into the mix a little bit by chartering the National Road in 1806, which was a large federal project to help people be able to move into and settle the Old Northwest. Another change in transportation are steamboats, which allowed for quicker transportation, especially upstream transportation, which would be important for trade. And steamboats are going to be important, as well as other watercraft, in transporting goods back and forth, especially with a canal building craze that starts with the construction of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was a large state-funded transportation project that would connect New York to the Great Lakes with a canal, or really sort of a man-made waterway. And the canal was at first derided as Clinton's Ditch, named after the governor of New York, who had funded it. But the success of the Erie Canal will set off a canal building craze across the country as other state and local governments invest a lot of money into canals, and this becomes the main thoroughfare by which people transport goods, along of course with rivers. That said, railroads would eventually overtake canals as the main mode of transportation. The construction of railroads tended to be cheaper, and also you did not have to depend with the railroads on the natural flow of rivers and the existence of waterways in order to connect different areas. You could simply lay track from one point to another and facilitate transportation that way. Now, I should add that there is much more construction of railroads in the North and in the Midwest than there will be in the South. In the South, most capital or money is tied up in land and in slaves, and that's going to be pretty important when we get to the Civil War, as the South will just simply not have the type of infrastructure to transport soldiers, supplies, and other things like the North will because they have more railroads. A technological advancement in communication is going to be the telegraph. The telegraph was invented by Samuel F.B. Morse, and it allowed for instantaneous communication across vast distances using a system of sort of short and long transmissions called Morse code. Now, these advancements in transportation and in communication help to facilitate westward migration. And as part of that westward migration, the United States did acquire more land. We've already seen the Louisiana Purchase, for example, but we should add a new territorial acquisition here with the purchase of Florida, which had been Spanish, but it was purchased by way of the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. Another main element of the market revolution is the rise of the so-called Cotton Kingdom in the South. But we don't want to just limit our understanding to the rise of cotton as a main American export to just the South, because as the North industrialized, it had a very high demand for raw cotton in order to produce textiles. And of course, the Southern climate was very well suited to grow that. Importantly, though, Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, which separated cotton from the sort of other bits that are in there, like seeds and other things, it made that process much easier. So it made Southern cotton much more profitable as it hadn't been before. We've talked already about how original colonial cash crops in the South were things like tobacco and lavender and rice, but not cotton, not yet. That will only become a major southern staple crop after the invention of the cotton gin. And again, southern climate is well suited to grow it, and southern soil, especially as they moved westward, is very suited to grow it. And this will allow the South to provide the raw cotton that northern industrialists want in order to produce textiles. Now, as cotton production expanded, so did slavery. That went along with it as the South continued its use of coerced labor to produce economic products. And as cotton cultivation expanded, so did migration into the so-called Old Southwest, places like Alabama and Mississippi, etc., for new, fresh soil to grow these crops in. And in fact, this sort of Old Southwest of Alabama and Mississippi was referred to at the time as the Black Belt because the soil was rich and dark and black. So-called king cotton, as you know, cotton becomes this number one export for America. It gets called cotton is king. But king cotton would come to be, like I say, America's largest export. And that means that it accounted, by the time we get to the lead up to the Civil War, as more exports than all other American exports combined. And as a result, king cotton becomes central to not only the Southern economy, but also the American economy in general.